How do you manage to rack up nearly six figures on airplane food? The bureaucrats repeatedly told these members of parliament that they could not provide the in-flight catering receipts. I was watching the committee meeting. What did I have in my hand? I had the receipts.
This is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation podcast. Lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government is our game. I'm Chris Sims. I'm here with my friend Franco at the federal office at the CTF. Franco, our work, also known as your work, landed on the front page of the National Post. What's going on?
Well, we were the first to discover that the Governor General's week-long trip to the Middle East cost taxpayers, drum roll please, $1.3 million. A week-long trip, $1.3 million. You can't make this stuff up, folks. I mean, now look, we don't have all the individual receipts, so we don't know exactly what they were spending the $1.3 million on at the time of recording this podcast, but we do have some of the receipts online, and here's some of the things that they were spending while they're in the Middle East. 160 smackers for tourists and travel book guides, which is crazy to me. I mean, they don't have phones. They don't have Google.
There's no internet over there, Franco.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Well, you know what they do have over there in the Middle East? They have 5-star hotels. You want to know how I know? Because the documents show that they were staying, the Governor General on their entourage were staying in some 5-star hotels during many legs of the trip, including the Emirates Tower in Dubai and the Sheraton Grand Doha Resort in Qatar. Now, the reason I'm looking down at my notes is because I have no idea what those hotels are.
I think one of them, I think one of them is one of the tallest buildings in the world. Oh my gosh.
Sounds fancy. They had a good view to see all of the money that they are wasting. That's great. Another crazy expense that we saw was nearly $45,000 for what appears to be a canceled trip to Abu Dhabi with no further details. Now, many people spend $0 not going to Abu Dhabi, but they managed to spend $45,000 not going to Abu Dhabi. Now, remember, this is 1 week, $1.3 million. Okay. So a huge expense for a week-long trip. And we haven't heard a real peep from the government to justify just what value, if any, taxpayers got from all this money spent.
I was just going to ask you, for this amount of money, they better have achieved a Middle East peace deal, man. Like, what the heck is going on? And isn't this the same trip where they racked up six figures on airplane food for like beef Wellington and carpaccio and stuff that I had to Google?
Sure is. Sure is. Governor General Mary Simon and her entourage of about 30 or so people spent, nearly six figures on fancy airplane food on their way to Expo 2020 in Dubai. They enjoyed beef Wellington, but what value did you, the taxpayer, get from this? You know, what value are taxpayers getting for the $1.3 million spent on a week-long trip to the Middle East? Now, remember, instead of spending $1.3 million on a week-long trip, taxpayers could have hired 16 more nurses for a year or covered the entire personal income tax bill of 78 Canadians making $75,000 this year. So here's the question. The $1.3 million question. Can the Governor General prove that spending $1.3 million on a week-long trip to the Middle East is a better use of taxpayers' money than hiring more nurses or helping struggling Canadian taxpayers? Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. We could certainly use those nurses down the street here. Franco, you dug deeper. So this story first surfaced a while back. We heard a dollar figure on what was being spent, but we largely didn't know what it was being spent on. You actually managed to dig up what kind of food these folks were buying on our dime. Now, I haven't eaten yet today, so this is going to make me super hungry. Can you describe to us what some of the fancy foods were?
Yeah. Forgive me if I butcher some of these names. I've just never had them before. So let me do my best.
If you're ever in a fancy restaurant and you want dessert, do not order sweet bread. It is not a cinnamon bun.
Oh,
just saying.
Okay. Noted. We're taking notes. Okay, let me try my hand with some of these. Beef Wellington with ragu, served with roasted baby potato, seasoned with rosemary and garlic, with a side of glazed baby carrots. Mwah. Very good. Okay. There was also buttery chicken tikka masala. I don't even know what that is, with cauliflower rice and steamed zucchini. Then apple and cranberry stuffed pork tenderloin served with oven roasted cubed squash, sauteed Brussels sprouts with a maple gravy. Yummy. Another meal. Let me read another meal for you. Pan-fried chicken scallopini in creamy mushroom wine reduction sauce with capers, served over fettuccine with a side of steamed asparagus and grilled red peppers. And let me read you some of the breakfasts that they were enjoying on our dime while they were flying to and from the Middle East. You have fresh omelet with Boursin cheese, sliced chives with sun-dried tomatoes, side of grilled artisan pork sausages and sauteed button mushrooms. One other one, French crepes with caramelized peaches, side of turkey bacon and potato roasty. Now, remember, this is all just the airplane food, okay? These fancy feasts that I just read off, they don't include what they may have had while they're actually on the ground in restaurants in the Middle East.
Okay, that is just so much money, and I'm super hungry now. I knew what most of that stuff was. I didn't know what beef carpaccio was, but they also spent $300 on it. So go figure. We've got $340 for baklava, $230 for flower arrangements. Simon's meals were expected to be specially plated. Keep this in mind. So she's the Governor General, okay? She is now His Majesty the King's representative here in Canada. We used to be Her Majesty the Queen's. So as Governor General, her meals were expected to be specially plated on china dishes, prepared with appropriate garnishes. And Franco, CTF supporters deserve some big credit for breaking this story for us.
Yeah. But before we give them credit, let me just say, I love baklava. You know, I love baklava.
I get it with shawarma sometimes.
Yeah. There's been a few nights out here in Ottawa, more than a few, maybe two, maybe more than I'd like to admit, where I probably racked up a pretty big tab on baklava. But I spent my own money.
Yes.
I didn't take money from my neighbors to spend hundreds of dollars on baklava for myself. But look, back to your point here. Absolutely, man. Our supporters absolutely hit a home run, knocked this sucker out of the ballpark. They took action, and they're a huge reason that we're actually able to know about these costs. Okay, so let's go back in the Wayback Machine and let's talk about how the story developed and what happened. So when the story first broke, and it was the National Post that first broke the story of the Governor General and her entourage spending nearly six figures on airplane food to the Middle East. Well, what we did is we immediately filed some access to information requests to get, well, what were they actually spending this nearly $100,000 on? What type of food were they enjoying on our dime while they were flying to and from the Middle East? So we got these records back, and we got these records back right around the time that the bureaucrats in charge of this trip were presenting to members of parliament on a government committee. And the members of parliament were grilling these bureaucrats about the costs, right? Rightfully so. How do you manage to rack up nearly six figures on airplane food? Now, the bureaucrats were misleading the members of parliament on committee. The bureaucrats were saying, well, we're really surprised with these costs too, right? Like, how did these costs balloon? We had eggs, we had omelets. And the bureaucrats repeatedly told these members of parliament that they could not provide the in-flight catering receipts because apparently they just didn't have that. Well, I was watching the committee meeting. What did I have in my hand? I had the receipts that we got from the government. So right then and there, we knew that these bureaucrats weren't passing the sniff test. So what do? Well, we phoned up the National Post. We said, hey, we got the receipts. Here you go. The National Post ran a big story about the beef Wellington, the beef carpaccio, and all the fancy food that they were having on airplane food. Okay, so then what happened next? Well, we told our supporters that, hey, these bureaucrats were misleading you. You need to email, contact your member of parliament on this committee and tell them to bring the bureaucrats back to committee, answer for their misleading statements, but also to provide the full receipts for this trip. right?
Yep.
And so after we sent out this email and our supporters took all the action that they did, I got a message from one of these members of parliament on the committee saying, whoa, Franco, you're flooding our inbox. You're flooding our inbox. Message received. Don't worry. We're going to do something about it.
Good.
So look, this is a legitimate win for our supporters and transparency because these bureaucrats blew way too much money on a trip. It looks like they spared no expense, but at the very least now, the committee is getting all the receipts back for international travel all the way back to 2014. And now we not just have the flight costs, but we have the costs of the entire week-long trip.
We do. And I'm really glad that you zeroed in on this and you had the receipts in your hand and you forced them to bring those bureaucrats back to cough up these receipts. And this is just what we know about, because I've worked on the Hill in different capacities. This happens way too often. Bureaucrats who are often making six figures and who've been there forever, playing dumb. And oopsie, the dog ate my homework, or hoping nobody notices anything. This is about accountability and transparency. And I'm glad that we dragged the receipts out of them, kicking and screaming. And now that it's on the record. But what do we do next, man? Like, what's the path forward? What do we want to see happen from here?
Well, yeah, I mean, a huge kudos to our supporters who took action. Yeah. I mean, if you're one of our supporters and you haven't taken action, then your first bit of homework is to, hey, go to our petitions page on taxpayer.com, sign the petition to rein in Governor General perks so that you can stand with tens of thousands of other Canadians and push for more action. Now, we're still waiting for all of these receipts to be posted online. So we're going to continue to hold these bureaucrats accountable until they are all fully published online. We also need just more transparency from Rideau Hall, right? We need all of the Governor General's expenses to be fully atypical. But even more than that, the Governor General should proactively post all the receipts online, right? Taxpayers paid the bill. We deserve to know what our money is being spent on. But even this trip, this $1.3 million week-long trip to the Middle East, it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to waste at Rideau Hall. Remember, you have the expense account for former governors general, where they leave office and they can still expense taxpayers for about $200,000 every single year for the rest of their lives and up to 6 months after they pass. But then also you have the Julie Payette pension problem, where Payette, she served for a little bit more than 3 years, and she's still eligible to collect an estimated $4.8 million through the pension to the age of 90. Absolutely unheard of, right? So with all of this type of wasteful spending at Rideau Hall, we should also see some legitimate budget reductions from the Governor General.
Yeah, that's what we need to do going forward. So, folks, if you want to see the CTF story on the National Post front page, check out our show notes. If you have not yet signed that petition to rein in those Governor General perks that Franco just talked about, please go to our website, taxpayer.com. Hit that up, sign that petition. You join our standing army that way. Yeah. So next time that we need to blast members of parliament or bureaucrats and force them to cough things up and be transparent, you're going to be part of that solution. And gotta really put a point on this. This was a big win for transparency and taxpayers pushing back. We would not have had this information come to the public unless folks took action and sent in those emails. So kudos to folks for actually standing up and being heard.